Do you know someone that's constantly glued to their phone? If so, then this is the cake for them. I'm Abby, and today I'm going to show you how you can make this iPhone cake. The great thing about this is by making different apps, you can make it personal to their character. Let's get started. Firstly, we're going to carve and buttercream our cake. As you can see here, these are two cakes, 6-inch squares. I've just split them in half so that I can fill them with some buttercream, and I'm going to carve the edges and buttercream the whole thing and put it in the fridge to chill. I'm going to fill the middle first, and then I'm going to stack them together, and then we're going to trim around the edges to round them off. I always find it's easier to stack it all up first before I do that. Just want to make sure that your two cakes are nice and level here. And I've also got a oblong board here, which I'm just going to use to give it some support underneath so that when we lift it onto the board later, it makes it really easy. That's an 8x4 board, if you're wondering. Now I'm going to line this up almost with the bottom end of one of my cakes here. Just allow myself a little bit extra so that we can trim those edges off. And the other end I'm going to pop on here so that we've got the overlap, because I'm actually going to trim one end of this cake off. I've got myself a little template that I drew here earlier, only a really simple one, just so that I can get a rough idea of size for my cake. Width-wise it's perfect, but I am going to trim the length off here. I'm going to remove one of those ends. Make sure that's even. And now I'm just going to trim around these little ends just to round them off. Because when you look at an iPhone, they've not got very sharp corners. They are quite soft, rounded corners. Same again on the other end. We're really not taking much off at all here. Okay, once you're happy with those, we're going to cover the whole cake in a layer of buttercream. It's important to make sure your cakes are level at this point, because this little ridge here will really show up if they're not level. Just going to bring a board in at this point so that I've got something to pop it on when I put it in the fridge. Okay, and once you're happy with your icing, you can pop this into the fridge for an hour, and we're going to move on to icing our board while this chills. As you can see, I've iced my board ahead of time, but while your cake is chilling is a great time to do this, as it gives it time to dry while your cake is also sort of setting hard in the fridge. I've got a 15-inch square board here. I'm going to show you how to achieve this effect. It's really simple. I've covered my board in a blue icing here, so I've got a small bit of blue. Once you roll it out on your board, got a bit of icing sugar there. If you roll it out like you would usually covering your board, give yourself a little bit of overhang on the edges. And I've got here some little edible sprinkles. They're really, really lovely colour. They're kind of like little grains. What I did is I just sprinkled, a bit much there, sprinkled it across the top and then roll it back in. And that pretty much makes it stay nice and stuck in your icing. Then once you've done that, you can trim around the edges of your board and neaten it up. It really is that simple, and it adds a great little effect to your board. Once you've iced your board, you can move on to icing your cake. Here I've got about 1 kilo of white icing. I'm just going to roll this out so that we can nice and easily put it on our cake. A nice big rectangle is what we need. My cake is now out the fridge, having chilled nicely. Dusted my surface with a bit of icing sugar. I'm just going to roll this out. Okay, you just want to make sure you've allowed enough icing so that it covers the top and down the sides. The important bit for this is because it's a rectangular cake, you need to get those corners covered, so make sure you've got enough to cover those corners. Okay, once you've got enough, roll it up onto your rolling pin and you can bring your cake in at this point. Put it down central as you can. And we're just going to lay it over the top like so. At this point I'm going to start using my smoother just to even that top out nicely, and it works brilliantly for around the side so you can get a nice crisp side. I'm also using a straight edge smoother here, which is brilliant for when you get to the bottom and you can really neaten those edges up. To kind of sort of hug it in and cushion it around the corners, just sort of gently easing your icing down. Don't do it too quickly, otherwise it will tear. I'm just going to trim away any excess sugar paste at this point. I'm going to leave a little bit around the bottom. I'm just pushing my smoother sort of down towards the bottom. I've got the sharp edge on the base. Just kind of flattening out some of that sugar paste on the bottom. Then what I can do is take my palette knife and run quite cleanly along the bottom. And it gives a really nice neat edge. I'm going to do that all the way around. At the same time making sure your top and your sides stay straight. I would work on the straight sides and then go back and do the corners. Okay, next I'm going to put my cake onto my board. If you can, and you do have time, it's best to give it some time to dry and set. It makes it a lot easier to move. Now I want to position my cake sort of diagonally on my board because we're going to put some headphones on here later. Having that board underneath makes it so easy to move. I just want to pop that on your board. Like so. And we're ready to move on to the next step. Now I'm going to show you how you can make the screen for your cake. As you can see, I've done mine in a coloured sort of shaded effect. That really adds something to the cake and it makes all those little apps pop. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay, I've got here a little ball of florist paste. I'm using florist paste because we want this to set quite firm. I need to be able to roll it out nice and thin without it breaking. I've probably got about sort of 150 grams there maybe. Just using a little rolling pin. I've dusted my surface with a bit of corn flour to stop this from sticking. Okay. I'm taking my template that I had earlier here and I've cut the centre out of it so that I've got this nice sort of rectangular shape. So I want to make sure that my icing is as big as that rectangle. Okay. And once you've got that the right size, I'm going to leave my template on my icing here, actually on my florist paste. And I'm going to take a stainless steel ruler, just because it's a nice sharp straight edge. And I'm going to lay it just to match the edge of my template. And I'm taking a cutting wheel here. And I'm just going to trim those edges. So you get a nice, sharp, crisp, straight edge. The last thing we want is a wonky screen. Okay, now I'm going to pop this onto a piece of foam. You can use a foam board if you so wish. And I'm going to lay that on there. And now I'm going to start dusting it. You may want to leave this to dry for a few minutes so it firms up a bit, but you do want to keep this sort of fairly soft so that we can lay it onto the iPhone later really easily. If it dries, it will be quite brittle, and then if you've got any edges that aren't quite matching the cake, it will cause problems. So on my palette here, I've got a variety of colours. I've got an ocean blue, a jade, and I think a peacock dust here. I've also got some white. And I'm going to make this sort of two-tone effect. So we're going to start with the dark blue at one side and the green at the other, and we're going to fade them up to the middle. I've also got a large sort of brush here, a really big one for dusting. I've also got a piece of kitchen paper here so that I can blend my dusts. So I'm just going to take a bit of my blue. This is sort of so that you can get the excess dust off your brush, because if you get too much on, you end up with big clumpy marks. And we're just going to dust one edge. We're working from the outside to the middle with this. It takes a little while to build the colour up, but once you do, it gives a really good effect. Okay, for the lighter shades of blue, I'm just going to take some of my white and mix it in with my blue. So we start to get sort of a paler shade. And you could choose whatever colours you want here. I've chosen blues and greens, but you could do pinks, oranges, purples. Depends on who your cake's for, really. If your cake is for someone quite girly, then definitely lots of pinks. Okay, so now I'm starting to work with my green here. I'm working from the bottom again, and I'm going to work towards the middle with this one. Using the peacock here at the moment. Okay, then once you're happy that you've blended it all well enough, I'm just going to dust down a little bit. Okay. Just want to brush a little bit of edible glue on a little bit of blue on my paintbrush, as you can see. Just so that sticks, and I'm going to pick this up. I want to position it on the cake. I'm going to leave a little gap at the bottom and a little gap at the top. You want a slightly bigger gap at the bottom. Make sure it's nice and even. Just lay that on. Nice and simple. And because that was made out of florist paste, it was really easy to move. Okay, so once you've done that, we're ready to move on and start making our apps for our cake. The apps on this cake are where you can really start to personalise it. It's really great because you can pick different apps for different people. Here I've gone for quite sort of a music themed set of apps. I'm just going to show you how to make sort of 3 different types here. One I'm going to do out of paint, one I'm going to do out of icing, and the other I'm going to do with a pen. So I'm going to start by showing you the one out of icing. To make my apps, I've just used a little square cutter here. I've just cut those out and left them to dry. I've used ordinary sugar paste for this because they're just going to go flat on the top of the cake. And I've mixed different colours. I've got all sorts of shades. It's great because you can really play around with it. So for my email app here, I've got a little, I've got a template to go from, a little picture that I printed out. So I'm just going to show you how I do this one. I'm going to cut a little square. It's going to go on my blue one here. And then I just trim down my square to make a little rectangle. Just like so. Using a little tiny palette knife, I'm just going to mark out the little tiny markings for the envelope. Really simple. Make sure that one meets in the middle. A little tiny dot of edible glue on that. And that just goes straight on there. Okay, that one was really simple. I've done the same for like the phone and the music box here. So that one's just going to go in there. Okay. Let's clear that out of the way. I'm going to show you how to make this little photo app now. To do that, I'm going to use these edible pens. These are really brilliant, great sort of felt tip pens, edible ones that you can use on cake. I've got a variety of colours here. So I'm just going to start and literally draw on the little coloured circles. That's that one. So easy to use, those pens. The final one I'm going to show you is one out of paint. I've got a little logo here for this. I've also got some white dust in my paint palette, and I'm just mixing that with some Rejuvenator Spirit. Mix that up. I'm actually going to paint this one on freehand. Use a slightly smaller brush for that. Again, these paints are nice and easy to use. I'm just going from my little picture that I've got here to help me. Okay, just like so. Okay, so now that my apps are all painted, I'm going to move them onto my cake. Let's move my things out of the way. I've kind of arranged my little tiles so that I know exactly where they're going to go on the cake. You can put them in any order you like. For this, I'm just going to use a little bit of edible glue. Now, at the bottom of your cake, there's normally a row of apps there. It's normally got your telephone app and maybe your Safari app, emails, and then all your your themed apps go at the top. So I'm going to leave myself a little bit of room up here because I'm actually going to put the date and the little battery symbol up here later. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to pop a little bit of glue on the back of each one. Now I've got those all in place, I'm going to just paint the little symbols along the top. So I'm going to do the battery, the time, there's a Wi-Fi symbol, and the iPhone balls, as they call them. So again, I've got my white paint here. Just going to pop a bit more Rejuvenator in it to loosen it back up. It's up to you whether you want to do this bit. I find it adds like a nice little finishing touch to it, but obviously it depends on your painting skills if you're not overly confident. So I'm going to pop the little circles in here, the balls. Like so. As you can see, I'm painting upside down just because I find that easier to do. It also means it's a lot closer to me. Do a little Wi-Fi symbol. Like so. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is start working on my headphones. Okay, right, for the headphones, I'm going to use some modelling paste. These are sort of like 3-in-1 paste, so they're not as rigid as the florist paste we used earlier, but they will still set nice and firm, and I can roll them out nice and easily. They've got quite a lot of elasticity to them. Right, so I'm going to start with the white, and I'm going to make the headphones. So I need 3 or 2 balls for the headphones. And I'm going to hold a little bit back because we're going to use that for the dial on the bottom of the iPhone in a moment. I'm going to roll this into a ball. Dust my hands with a bit of corn flour. I'm going to roll it in sort of like a tapered cone. I'm going to flatten one end by just standing it upright. Then what we're going to do is we're going to bend this so that we end up with like a curved piece. Might need to roll it a bit longer there. And that will form your earbud for your headphones, like so. And we're going to do another one of those. Again, flatten the end of that bit. You want them about the same size, obviously. And bend it. Just going to take the end of a paintbrush here, and I'm going to make a little hole in the end, like a little dent almost. Give that a wiggle. Same with this one. So that we can pop our cable into that in a moment. And I'm going to set those aside to dry. Also going to make 2 small pieces with this. So one, we're going to do the dial, and then I'm going to make a little piece to go on the end for where it would plug into the phone. I'm going to roll a piece of this out. Sticky. I'm just using a little circular cutter here. Pop that out and leave that to dry as well. For the piece that attaches the headphones, I'm just going to take a small ball. I'm going to flatten it between my fingers at either end, and I'm going to sort of spin it. I've got a little bit black in there. Get rid of that. So it kind of forms like a little cylinder. You can roll that on your board. Like so. I'm also going to make a little hole, just a little dent in the end of one of those. Okay. Now moving on to the cable next, the wire for the headphones. I've got some grey modelling paste here. As you can see, I've got 2 shades of grey. The slightly darker one is for the headphones later. Give it a good knead. Now I'm going to pull off a little bit to save for later. I'm going to roll this into a nice long thin sausage. You want enough cable so that you can kind of come round the side of your phone and up, so you can attach them to your headpieces. I'm going to roll this in 2 parts. I'm going to roll one length for the majority of it, and then where they split to go into either ear, I'm going to make another piece for that one. Okay, I'm going to bring my cake in at this point just to measure how much I need. So we're going to come out of the bottom of the cake here. So I just want to work out roughly how much cable I need. The reason I'm using modelling paste for this is because it keeps it from breaking in the middle. As you can see, I can roll this out nice and long without any breaks, hopefully. Okay, I think we're about there. Okay, so I'm going to attach this to the cake. I'm actually going to take the little white piece first, and that is going to go here on my cake, if you can see that. And then I'm going to have the cable coming out of it. So I'm going to use a bit of edible glue, and at this point I'm going to bring in some kitchen paper because you need something for this to dry against to hold its shape. So I'm actually going to put a piece of kitchen paper sort of here. That's my edible glue. You want the end with the dent on the outside, obviously. Bit of glue on there. Let's get this ready. So it just gives that bit of support there. Edible glue on the other end. I have to roll that out a bit thicker. Then we're going to wind that round the board. I'm going to come up here. Okay, once that's sort of nicely in position, spin that around. I'm going to bend this in a bit. Got quite a lot of cable here. And I'm going to roll another piece now to come up the other side of that. Okay, I'm going to flatten one end of this slightly. And we're going to attach that one to the other side using some glue. And I'm going to have that one up there, like so. Okay, next what we can do is we can position our earphones in place. You want to make sure you've got enough room. I have mine going inwards. You can trim a little bit off the end of these if you need. So that they'll just sit like so. I'm going to attach those with a bit more glue so they're not going to go anywhere. On the bottom. Obviously don't glue them in until you're attached with the position. You're happy with the position they're in. Like so. I'm going to make the little speakers that go on the end of this now, and this is where my darker grey comes in. We're going to need 2 little circles, one for each headphone, but I'm going to do one in the dark grey and one in the light grey for each earphone. So for these, I just took a little ball of icing, rolled it in my hands and flattened it out. You want these to be about the same size. This one's going to be slightly smaller than your earphone, and the other one will be just the same size. So we'll do the dark one first. Just flatten it out a bit, like so. Set that aside for a moment. Do the same again. Make sure those are roughly the same size. Okay, and with the light grey we had earlier, these ones are going to be slightly bigger. The reason I'm not doing these with the cutter is because I want that sort of slightly rounded, almost puffy edge to these. Yeah, you want that one just to be about the same size as the front of that earphone one. Lovely. So stick the larger ones on first. Before we stick these ones on, I'm actually just going to mark them a little. I've got the stitch effect on a designer wheel here, which is great for making those little marks of where the speaker kind of sits. The pattern of that. Oh. Just sort of go one way and then go back across the other. It's quite fiddly on such a small little piece of icing. And then the other one. That little sort of crisscross effect you get. Okay. And they just go in the centre. Like so. Just going to make one more little piece for my headphones, and that's a little bit, it's just going to cover this up here. There's normally like a little bar over it. To do that, I'm just going to roll a little bit of the lighter grey out. I'm actually using my little square cutter that we used earlier here. And we're not going to make a full square, we're going to make this into a rectangle. So I'm just going to cut so I've got a nice straight edge, and then we're going to trim that off like so. We're going to wrap that over this piece here. Just like that. I'm actually going to do the same up here as well. cutting about 1/3 of that square off. So when you kind of want to wrap all the way around, poke it in underneath, like so. Same again on the other side. And that is your earphones done. So next I'm just going to add the little dial and the little speaker and the buttonholes on your iPhone. To do that, I've got that white round that we cut out earlier. That one I'm just going to glue on the bottom. I'm trying to work light to dark here so that I don't get any black marks on my white clean sugar paste. That one goes in the middle, just like so. And I'm going to paint that now. And to do that, I'm just using some silver roll chem dust and a little bit of rejuvenated spirit, make it into a paint like we did for the white earlier. This stuff's brilliant. It's really nice and shiny, gives a really metallic finish. And I'm just going to paint the little edge of this circle. This is where you need a steady hand. To make the little speaker box on the top, I'm just using a bit of black paste here. These are really simple. They're kind of sort of make them by hand. I'm not using any cutters. So I'm just going to roll a little sausage. Dust my hands up slightly. And I'm going to flatten it slightly in my hand and just make sure those edges are rounded. If you can see that on the camera, it's quite tiny. And a little bit of glue. And that's going to sit in the centre of this white bit at the top of our cake. So line it up with your thyme in the middle. Just like so. There are also a couple of other little tiny sort of speaker holes on the top of your iPhone. So I'm just going to make those using little tiny balls of icing that I'm just going to flatten between my fingers. I've got one here. Let's spin that around. Probably see that a bit better. A tiny little one at the top there. There's also a few on the bottom where you would attach your charge cable. So I'm going to make those in exactly the same way as I've just done. These are slightly smaller. This is all a matter of detail, really. You can be as complex with these bits as you like. I'm trying to keep them nice and simple. Okay. Now that's all the little details added to my cake. The only thing left to do is add the ribbon and some writing. Okay, so I'm just going to add the finishing touches to my cake now. I'm going to pop a name on it, and to do that I'm using these really lovely Push Easy plunger cutters. They're so easy to use. I've just rolled out a little bit of sugar paste here. Pop the cutter in and then push down on it, and that'll release your letter. And that really is that straightforward to use. They're great. They're really funky, these letters. I'm just going to attach those to my cake board using a little bit of glue. I'm going to paint the back of the letter. Like so. And the last thing I'm going to do is add my ribbon. I've attached some double-sided sticky tape around the edge of my cake board. Just going to peel that off. I'm just using a 15mm wide ribbon here, which fits around the board perfectly. Touch another little bit of double-sided tape. Okay, and there you have it. That's your iPod all finished and completed.